Hey, if you want to show your love and support me and the podcast, you can buy my brand new album, All Hail Laughter, on iTunes, Amazon, and or plus you can support my podcast by going to patreon.com/Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. Please show your love. I would appreciate it. Hi, this is Tom Rhodes. Please join me as I scour the four corners of the earth to bring you interesting and intelligent, funny people who will enrich your life with wisdom and laughter. I'll take you to Europe, Australia, all over America. I might take you to the peaks of Machu Picchu, the canals of Amsterdam, the Great Wall of China, or the swamps of Florida, and certainly the many, many comedy clubs and comedy theaters all over the world. Come hang out with me and meet the many interesting people that pop up in my life as I travel the world as a stand-up comedian.
You're listening to Tom Rhodes Radio.
Karate kick, baby.
Rock and roll.
Bonjour, y'all, and welcome to Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. I'm speaking to you now from Paris, France. Oui, oui. Mon frères, mon amis, mes amis. I will try to exhaust every word I learned in high school French during this episode. Mon crayon est jaune et grand. I think that means my pencil is big and yellow. I've got a long history with Paris, as some of you know. And I'm here by myself this visit because my beautiful, brilliant wife, Ashna, the frequent flyer miles to cash in a free ticket for her, she would have had to stay in Europe for 6 weeks, and we both thought that was a bunch of bullshit. So she took one for the team and sat this trip out. So I'm here by myself, got a great tour. Starting in Paris, then Sunday I'm in Antwerp, Tuesday, December 5th, I'm in Amsterdam, hope to see all my Dutchies, and then I'm going to be in Switzerland, Geneva, December 6th, Zurich, December 8th, and Basel, December 9th. What a tour. Hey, so I am in the Saint-Germain neighborhood of Paris. Very good friend, one of the local comedians in Paris, offered for me to stay in their luxurious apartment in the Saint-Germain neighborhood. And if you're familiar with Paris, the Saint-Germain neighborhood is probably the swankiest part of the city. And the irony of it all is the heat doesn't work too well. And I am freezing like a motherfucker. So I'm staying in this really nice, swanky apartment, and there's a fireplace, and I'm tempted to chop up this Victorian furniture so I can get a little heat. Looking out the window, straight out through the window, is the St. Sulpice Church. And if you're familiar with, I was told this, that Dan Brown book, The Da Vinci Code, apparently this church right across the street plays a big part in that, where it was built on some meridian line and whatever. So apparently, since it's right across the street, I am on a meridian line. I went in there today. It's kind of old, kind of shitty. Not as nice as Notre Dame and some of the other churches. But this neighborhood is really, really swanky. Also, if you look out the other side, the other windows of this apartment, there's this wall, this massive wall that has the Arthur Rimbaud poem, The Drunken Boat. It's in French, of course, but I love Rimbaud, and it's quite a tingle to see the man's, this long poem right there on the wall. I've been reading a lot of stuff, getting ready for this. You know, I love history and violence and mayhem in literature. So I've been reading a lot about the French Revolution, and I was taking the subway. You know, if you're going to get your head cut off on the guillotine, you got to say something cool before you get your head cut off, right? So just a few blocks from here is the Odeon neighborhood or part of it's on Saint Germain Boulevard. And I was taking the metro, the subway, and there's a statue of this guy, Danton, Danton, and they had a map of all this historic events that happened during the French Revolution. And so, like, very close to where I'm staying is where Marat was assassinated, which I'll tell you more about that in a second. But this guy, Danton, he went to the guillotine and he said to the executioner, "Don't forget to show my head to the people. It's well worth seeing." What a great line. Right before you get your head chopped off and it plops into the basket. So I was in Vancouver last weekend, and there's this brilliant bookstore there called McLeod's, used bookstore, rare books. And I was poking around this bookstore at the French Revolution section, and I found this book, and it's called A Journal of the Terror. So Louis XVI was the king that got his head cut off, and his wife was Maria Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette, not Maria. Jesus, what is it? West Side Story? So this is a journal that was kept by the valet of Louis XVI. And it's really interesting. I read this on the plane coming over. So the king's family is being held, and it's not looking good for him. The people have taken over, and they're all, the citizens are going ape shit, and they want blood. They want to murder the royal family as quick as possible. Here's a cute little passage. This is the valet of Louis XVI who wrote this book. This is like his journal. The queen, coming to herself, mingled her tears with those of her children, and all the family removed to Madame Elizabeth's chamber, where the noises of the mob were less heard. They're going apeshit in the street. I remained a short time in the Queen's, and looking out at the window through the blinds, I saw the Princess de Lambelle's head. The person that carried it was mounted upon the rubbish of some houses that were ordered to be pulled down for the purpose of isolating the tower. Another stood behind him, holding the heart of that unfortunate princess, covered with blood, on the point of a saber. The crowd, being inclined to force the gate of the tower, was harangued by a municipal officer named Dujon. I very distinctly heard him say, "The head of Antoinette does not belong to you. The departments have their respective rights to it. France has confided these great culprits to the care of the city of Paris, and it is your part to assist in securing them until the national justice takes vengeance for the people." He was more than an hour debating with them before he could get them away. Wow. So these people are at the gates. They're going ape shit. This is cute. So one day, to pass the time, the king is just reading books, and they're in the little library section in the tower. And one day, when I was there with the king, he pointed to the works of Rousseau and Voltaire. "These two men," he said to me in a whisper, "have caused the ruin of France." Yeah, it got the people thinking. And that's another thing that's in this journal, like the guards, they won't call him the king, they won't call him your majesty. They keep calling him monsieur, mister, and whatever his family name was, cadet. And he keeps saying, "That's not my name." And these like real ruffian mongrels keep taunting him and his family that they're just people, that they're not ordained by God. They don't have some special blood in their bodies. And as this journal goes on, it's probably like a month before he's murdered. It's just, it's slowly coming to the realization, these people, that shit's not looking good for them. So the prince, who often prevailed on his majesty to play a game of Siam with him, was so pressing that day that the king, in spite of his situation, could not refuse him. The Dauphin lost every game, and twice he could get no further than 16. Whenever, cried he in a little pet, whenever I get to the point of 16, I am sure never to win the game. The king said nothing, but he seemed to feel the coincidence of the words. That was Louis the 16th. He did not say anything cool when he got his head cut off. There's this other book that I've been reading, and it's called The Paris in the Terrors. The French, they kill the king, and they're trying to start a new constitution in France, and these mongrel people are running the country, and they're cutting people's heads off. So there was this political party called the Girondins that they came into power when the French Revolution happened, and then they quickly fell out of power, and then everyone started cutting their heads off, and they fled to this town in Normandy called Caen. And so there's this famous painting by David, and it depicts the assassination of Marat. If you want to look it up, Marat, the assassination of Marat. So Marat was this real shit stirrer during the revolution. This guy had tried to be an artist. He had tried to be a scientist. And back then, you had to be admitted to a salon if you wanted to be an artist. There was a committee that voted on it. And then there was, schools or leagues of scientists. You had to write papers. People would write about it. So this guy was a failed artist, failed scientist, real bitter. He could never get anything going. So he started his own newspaper, and he was really stirring up the shit. And he had a skin condition. Okay, this is what he said. This is from the book Paris in the Terror by Stanley Loomis. I don't know where I found this, but what a great book. I am the rage of the people, he declared, and indeed in that sick and twitching face seemed written the past suffering and the approaching vengeance of all the beaten, rejected, and despised. Dressed in greasy rags, caked with filth, cracked by disease, Marat made the strongest tremble and the boldest keep his distance. It was noticed that even the men of his own party chose not to sit too close to the reeking and unwashed figure of their leader, whose skin was covered by scabs and pustules of eczema, rumored among the ignorant to be, in fact, leprosy. So this guy, Marat, had this terrible skin disease, and he's constantly in pain. He's got scabs all over himself, and he has to bathe himself, soak in a big copper bathtub. So this painting that's always captivated me, this Assassination of Marat by David, he's in this tub, and he's got a pen in his hand, and he's got a piece of paper, and it's kind of strange. It's, guy's slouched back, and he's in a tub, and it looked like he just finished writing a letter or something. So I wanted to know what that story was about Marat. So the first chapter of this book, Paris in the Terror, is the assassination of Marat. And this story, Jesus Christ, somebody should make a movie out of this. This story is so brilliant. This girl in Caen, Charlotte Corday. She's reading Roman books and things from antiquity, and there was this beautiful passage about like a young woman in love. Where is it? Anyway. Forgive me. She's all caught up in this romantic world of literature. I can relate to that. Here we go. On the wings of sublime verse, the impressionable girl was daily transported into this fantastic world. Degree by imperceptible degree, the ideals of the 17th century Romans became her ideals, and the impossibly elevated standards by which they lived became her standards. They fortified her and became sources of a secret strength. She went about her dull daily chores like someone in the initial stages of a love affair, impervious to reality. Her chores, it may be added, she did well, for she was a Norman and a noble, but they were distinctions which never trespassed upon the rich and better world that she bore within her. This girl, she's only like 17, 18, 19 years old, just fresh-faced, healthy Norman farm girl, and that lax and frivolous acceptance of life that is engendered in weak people by too much sunlight or happiness, and which sometimes leads to indiscriminate and vulgar bursts of passion, is rarely to be found in the Norman character. Precaution, common sense, and a regard for the proprieties direct the Norman towards his well-considered decisions. Tenacity holds him on the path to their accomplishment. So they talk a lot about her character and just how Norman people are. And this girl takes it upon herself because the Girondins had been driven out of Paris. They're afraid for their life. And now Marat and these different characters are, this orgy of blood and violence. And she takes it upon herself that she's going to kill this motherfucker. And she doesn't tell any of her friends. She doesn't tell any of her family. The girl had never been to Paris before in her life. This is the 1700s. I mean, it probably took, a 10-hour train ride to get to Paris back then. So she gets to Paris. She checks into a hotel, and she somehow finds out the address of where Marat is living, which is over by the Odeon neighborhood off of Saint-Germain Boulevard, not far from here. I should find the address. It's probably like a Starbucks now. By his compulsive and jerky walk, one recognized him as an assassin who had escaped from the executioner, but not from the Furies, a man who wished to annihilate the whole human race. Yeah, man, he was a bad dude. And so little old Charlotte Corday comes to Paris. She's turned away from his house, and then she goes to a market. They have a big trial afterwards. All these facts come out. She goes and she buys this big-ass knife. And the next day, she says to, like, his sister and housemaid who are looking after him, he refuses to see any visitors. He's trying to put out this newspaper and flame the fires of the revolution and all that. She says that she's come from Cannes, and she has information on the Girondins who fled Paris. So he lets her come in, and he's in his bathtub soaking, and he says, give me the names of the Girondins that you saw there. And she starts rattling off the names of the people that she saw, the Girondins in Cannes. And he says, excellent. In a few days' time, I shall have them all guillotined in Paris. And that's when she pulls out a knife and jams it in his chest through his heart and kills him. So that's the mystery of that painting that I've always been captivated by. He wasn't writing a letter. He was writing down the names of the Girondins that he wanted to have guillotined in Paris. So that's that story. And I guess that's kind of that was my little Dan Brown uncovering of meridian lines. I'm happy to know the truth. I was not going to read any more of this book, but then the next chapter is the trial of Danton. And that's the dude who said, hold my head up high so the people can see it. Because my shit looks good, even if it ain't on my torso. So I'm a Francophile. I love everything about France and French culture. Sure, there's some irritating things like expensive homes not having proper heat. The first time I came to Paris, the first love of my adult life was with Nathalie, and we lived together in San Francisco for 7 years. And the first time I came to Paris, I stepped in dog shit. There's dog shit all over Paris. Not in the Saint-Germain neighborhood. I guess the rich people have their dog shit cleaned up. But I've always thought this was amusing. Parisian people, when I stepped in dog shit, they said, oh, it's considered good luck to step in dog shit in Paris. And I think Parisians say that so that they don't have to clean up their dog shit. But in the 1990s, when I first came to Paris, there were these really cool motorcycle dudes. And I'm sure you can Google this and find it, man. But they do not exist anymore. There was these motorcycle dog shit cleaners. These guys, these city workers are on these like really cool, like kind of Kawasaki dirt bikes. And it was like they had a vacuum cleaner with a tank on their back and this like huge like vacuum cleaner suction thing. And like the dirt bike would jump up onto the sidewalk and the dude is just like sucking up this dog shit with this. It was so cool. There's never been a cooler dog shit cleaner upper ever. And I was imploring the people on stage last night, people in my audience, that they have to start a petition and get the city of Paris to bring back these like dog shit motorcycle superheroes. I actually wrote a letter to Marvel Comics that they should include the dog shit motorcycle cleanup man in the Justice League, because that's quite a powerful superpower if you think about it. Pretty cool, man. The dog shit cleaners. What else can I tell you? Yesterday I finally got to go to the catacombs. When Ashna and I were here in July, it was so friggin' hot, and we tried to go twice, and we stood in line, and we couldn't get in. So I'm jet lagged. I'm up all night. I'm waking up at strange hours. Yesterday I woke up at like 4 a.m, and I thought, great, man, I can. I Skyped with Ashna for like a couple hours, and then I thought, shit, man, I can be at the door of the catacombs when they open at 10. So if you're planning a trip to Paris and you want to go to the catacombs, don't even bother in the summer unless you reserve your tickets online. Otherwise, you're just going to wait in line all day. You're going to ruin a day in Paris. But if you go in winter, it's easy as shit to get in. I got there at 10 when the doors opened. I still had to wait a half hour. But so the catacombs are really interesting. These were originally limestone quarries when the Romans lived here. What did the Romans call Paris? Lucretia? I think that's it. Lucretia. when the Romans first settled Paris, they had these stone quarries so they could build monuments and whatever. And then there was nothing there for a long time. And then Paris built up. The catacombs was created in the late 18th century in abandoned underground quarries dating from the 15th century in the locality of the Tomb Issouri. Too bad I can't pronounce shit. The first bones were transferred here from what was the largest Parisian cemetery at the time. So Paris is building up, and they've got these ancient cemeteries in the center of the city. And that's not going to do. They got to move that shit. So they dug up all these bones. So it was this Saint Innocent Cemetery located in the Les Halles. Les Halles. I was just at Les Halles today because right between Les Halles and Etienne Marcel, the metro stops on the 4 line, is my favorite food street, Montegoya, which we discovered last time we were here. So when you take the subway to Les Halles, the announcer goes, Les Halles. It's not what it fucking looks like it sounds like. Anyway, so that's where this big cemetery of the Saints Innocents was, that they dug up all these bones. The cemetery was closed in 1780 at the request of the municipality due to concerns for public safety. Anyway, so they transported all the bones from that cemetery and a lot of the other cemeteries to this old stone quarry. And they got all these bones, they started stacking up all these bones. So it's this underground tunnels, the catacombs, and it's just skulls and shin bones, and it's just, I'd read about it, I'd seen pictures of it, and it was just something I really wanted to see once in my life. And now that I did it, I don't think I ever need to go back. I took a lot of pictures, posted them on Instagram. And for our Patreon subscribers, I also took some nice video down there. So if you're a Patreon Golden Buddha, you can have access to me down in the spooky-ass skull and bone tunnel. And you should become a Patreon member. You can have cool things like that. Anyway, I put some pictures on Instagram, and it was these long-ass tunnels, man. It was really interesting. People would sneak down there in the 17 and 1800s and have parties, and somebody hired an orchestra and threw a little soiree. Anyway, the catacombs. It was interesting. It's football season. I'm trying to get together and see my friend Pierre. Pierre owns this bar. It's right next to the Pantheon. And I think we've talked about this before. I'm not sure. But he's got a sports bar, and they show NFL games. When Ashna and I were here 3 or 4 years ago, when they had the Super Bowl, when it was the Seattle Seahawks versus the Broncos. So this guy, Pierre, he's a huge NFL fan, and he's a huge Green Bay Packers fan. And so it's this sports bar in Paris, and the Pantheon is where all the greatest French writers and dignitaries are buried. And like this underground tomb, and the bar is like it's one spiral football throw away from the Pantheon. And the bar is called Wide Open Spaces. And you walk in there, and he's got tons of Green Bay Packers shit all over the walls. And we were here for the Super Bowl years ago. I did a show, and my friend Sand, who's been on this podcast, beautiful Dutch supermodel, stand-up comedian, and actress. She's in Thailand right now making a movie. She's friends with Pierre. She hooked me and Ashna up to go have VIP seats to watch the Super Bowl. So the VIP seats were standing behind the bar. And if you remember that Super Bowl, the opening play of the game, the ball goes into the end zone and it's a touchback. It's a terrible thing to happen, especially the first play of the game. And it's 2 points for the Seattle Seahawks. So the bar is completely standing room only, packed to the gills. Ashen and I are behind the bar with Pierre and his cousin, who also owns the bar. And all these Seattle Seahawk fans are taunting the Bronco fans, going, yeah, fuck you, fuck you. And Pierre pulls out a microphone from behind the bar and he goes, attention, attention. You will show your opponent respect. You will not taunt the opposing team. You will cheer for your team with dignity. And you will conduct yourself with manners against your opponent, or you will be asked to leave. It was the most egalitarian thing I've ever seen in sports. It was so French, in fact. Anyway, Pierre's a great guy. He came to see me last time I was in Paris, and I told that story on stage. And it's funny, whenever I've seen people in the United States wearing Green Bay Packers jerseys or a cheesehead hat, I always thought to myself, yeah, what a fucking hayseed. Look at that dairy cow farmer. Now when I see someone wearing a Green Bay Packers jersey, I think, hey, that's kind of Parisian. It's pretty chic. Pierre is such a Packers fan that the website for his bar is packers.fr. If you don't believe me, take a peek. What else can I tell you here in this cold-ass apartment? I found this other book in Vancouver at McLeod's last week. It's called The Banquet Years: The Origins of the Avant-Garde in France from 1885 to World War I. So apparently this 30-year period, that's when the Eiffel Tower was built. Just different art came into being. There was so much just wealth and enjoyment of life. They called it the banquet years. And people had such long feasts, dinners, that they had to invent an intermission. Listen to this. This is the beginning of this book. For Paris, they were the banquet years. The banquet had become the supreme rite, the cultural capital of the world, which set fashions in dress, the arts, and the pleasures of life, celebrated its vitality over a long table laden with food and wine. Part of the secret of the period lies no deeper than this surface aspect: upper-class leisure. The result, not of shorter working hours, but of no working hours at all for property holders, produced a life of pompous display, frivolity, hypocrisy, cultivated taste, and relaxed morals. The only barrier to rampant adultery was the whalebone corset. Many an errant wife, when she returned to face her waiting coachman, had to hide under her coat the bundle of undergarments which her lover had not been dexterous enough to lace back around her torso. The bourgeois meals reached such proportions that an intermission had to be introduced in the form of a sherbet course between the two fowl dishes. So the dinners were so long, they invented a sherbet break. Wow. Upper class leisure. I can't, there's so many great books, so little time. This book just seems really, really amazing. These truisms were simple and in their own way wise. Everyone loves a crowd. Everyone has a right to privacy. Equality is a word reserved for public declarations and must not be allowed to pervert justice and social distinctions. Politics is a game played for fun or profit. Business is a game best mixed with pleasure. Love cannot last, but marriage must. Any vice can be forgiven except lack of feeling. The histrionic gifts of the French, concentrated in one city, enacted these themes with passion and conviction. God damn, I love France. Yeah, man. So I'm really I'm bursting with enjoyment, even though it's so friggin' cold. Just all these things I love reading, and it talks about how the bicycle. This is I want to read I want to finish reading the Terrors in Paris and the Terrors, but this book is calling out to me, The Banquet Years. The bicycle represented it was a modern, independent invention, means of transportation, and then right after the bicycle, the airplane and flight captivated people's imaginations. So people are just so excited about, balloons, and they're flying all over France. And then also, there were contests in Europe and the United States for cash prizes if you could be the first person to fly or invent an airplane. And there was this one guy, I think it was 1902. I'm just pulling this out of my head. I think the French, they're so pessimistic and miserable. I think that they were optimistic people at one point. And I think this one event in 1902 is what turned them into pessimists. This guy had invented these wings, and he wanted to fly. Everyone thought this guy could do it. There is a video of this on YouTube, and you can look it up. This guy, he invents these wings, and he turns up to the Eiffel Tower, and he wants to test his wings. So he goes up. It wasn't all the way to the top. I think it was on that third level platform, which is still pretty high up. So he goes up there with his wings, and the cops and the guards and everybody in France knew this guy. They thought, sure, this guy can do it, no problem. Bob, whatever his name was, fuck, everybody knows Bob's going to be the first one to fly. And so somebody was filming this, and the guy jumps off the Eiffel Tower and dropped like a fucking brick. And it's almost like a cartoon, the way they show that guy hit the ground. But unfortunately for his family, it wasn't a cartoon. Too bad he didn't have a clever line to say before he jumped off. Be sure to hold my head up for the people. It is a sight to see. So, all right. I'm so glad I've been to Paris so many times that I do not have to go to Père Lachaise Cemetery. I've been to Père Lachaise Cemetery so many times. Oscar Wilde is buried there. If you're unfamiliar with Oscar Wilde, I mean, he's probably the most quotable human being. Any book of quotes is just full of Oscar Wilde quotes. I love Oscar Wilde. His famous last words were, he was in Paris when he died, and his famous last words were, either this wallpaper goes or I do. But really, was that really his last words? I think maybe his last words might have been gargle, 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 gargle. But, it's hard to type that. The love of Oscar Wilde's life was with a young man named Bosie. Yes, Oscar Wilde was married and he had 2 kids. It's a pesky little detail. Like Voltaire hating Jews and Muslims. Pesky little detail. Side note. Oscar Wilde's love of his life was with this young man named Bosie, and Bosie's father was the Marquis of Queensberry in England. And the Marquis of Queensberry could not stand. I mean, homosexuality was illegal then, and you could be thrown in prison, and it drove the Marquis of Queensberry nuts that his son was gay, number one, and then on top of that, that he's running around with this loudmouth, flamboyant, frivolous writer, Oscar Wilde. So the Marquis of Queensberry persecuted. He thought if he could crush Oscar Wilde, that his son would magically become heterosexual or something like that. It persecutes Oscar Wilde, has him thrown in the Reading jail, and he writes his most famous poem, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, and he was sentenced to hard labor. And, the guy was an artist. He had soft hands and never worked a hard day in his life. He spent most of his time at Trinity College in Dublin drinking champagne and taking feather baths. Anyway, so this time in prison doing hard labor is pretty much what crushed Oscar Wilde and destroyed him. It ruined his life. He never recovered. He got out of prison. He got to spend the last few years of his life in Paris, but he was a broken man, financially ruined. His health was ruined, and he never recovered. And he ended up dying from the time that he spent in that prison. And this is the same Marquis of Queensberry who invented the rules for boxing, the Marquis of Queensberry rules for boxing. This is the same man. So because I love Oscar Wilde so much, on the rare occasion that I do fight, I always fight dirty. Père Lachaise Cemetery, you've got the Lumiere brothers who invented cinema. They invented a superior film projection camera than Thomas Edison's. And Jim Morrison is buried there. And also, Chopin is buried in there. Marcel Proust. I think it was me first going to Jim Morrison's grave at Père Lachaise that started my fascination with going to graves of people that I admire. I think it's really cool to make pilgrimages to the grave of people that you admire. And I would love for people to visit my grave when I'm dead. And that's why I want to be famous enough and rich enough that I could have a grave with a jacuzzi on top of it. And I want to leave enough money so that the jacuzzi's always cleaned and it's got fresh water in it. And then people could come and sit on my grave and hang out and have a nice little spa, bubbly bath, and they're sitting in the hot tub jacuzzi and go, that Tom Rhodes, he really was a nice guy. It's a nice thought. Anyway, so what are some other things I can tell you before I go get some more baguettes and cheese? I got to find a vegetable, man. Paris, France. I hate when Americans say they don't like France or French people. That irritates the shit out of me. France gave the world the bikini and lingerie. What's not to like? And then the United States would never have gained our independence from England had it not been for the French naval blockade at the Battle of Yorktown. And the Marquis Lafayette is who arranged that strategic naval blockade for us. And that's why when the United States landed on the beaches of Normandy in World War II, the United States government sent a message to the French government, and it said, Lafayette, we are here. Okay. Anyway, I'm a quoting son of a bitch today. Man, I'm just trying to fill your brain with some wise shit. I'm sitting here by myself. Oh my God, there's a statue of Diderot. I just stumbled across it right around the corner. Diderot said that the world will not be free until the last king is strangled to death with the entrails of the last priest. I was in Thailand 2 weeks ago, and there was some French people in the audience, and I quoted that. And as those words left my mouth, I realized, oh shit, Thailand has a king. Well, I didn't mean your king. I meant like olden days kings. Anyway, Diderot. That's pretty badass that there's a statue to Diderot. And then a little further down the road is the statue to Danton. Yeah, whatever. Okay, well, I'm just about to fucking wrap this shit up. I'm going to go step in some dog shit. Did you know I have kissed 4 different women at the top of the Eiffel Tower? The Eiffel Tower is my, I think it's the monument to love. It's my litmus test in my life. 3 of the 4 women that I took to the top of the Eiffel Tower, I was madly in love with, and I had to take them to the top and kiss them, to see if the magic tingles happened. And I married the last woman that I took up there, Ashna Rojan. That's my smoochie. So there was some truth in my little love test at the top of the Eiffel Tower. So I took Ashna up there. It was her birthday in February. It was freezing. We were only out there for a minute, but we kissed, and yeah, I knew it. I knew she was the one. Anyway, it's Christmas time here. It's cool. There's just Christmas decorations everywhere. It is 39 degrees right now and dipping. I keep taking hot showers. Let me just, I've got 2 more days here. Well, 1 more day before I go to Antwerp on Sunday. And the sun has just set. It's already dark. It's 5:25 p.m. right now. I'm excited that I've got time to stroll around. I think it's really cool to arrive here and be jet lagged and just walk around all in the middle of the night. I did it with Ashna in July. I did it the last couple days here, even though it's winter. I'm really happy. I played this cool place called the Cafe Oscar. Really charming little club. Had paintings of naked women all over the walls. And Gad Elmala's manager and the head of his production company came to see my show. I destroyed it. Did all my great French stories about me getting maced in Paris and almost drowning in Thailand. And anyway, they have a show here in Paris. They do once a month, and it's called One Night Stand. And it looks like I'm going to come back to Paris next October and do the show. So if you're a Tom Rhodes fan and you want to come to Paris and you're looking for an excuse, I say you should start pulling up the couch cushions and looking for spare change and saving up for this trip. And you should come see me in Paris next October when I come back and do this nice theater for Gad Elmala's production company. It's called One Night Stand, and they just started doing it. They're bringing over an American once a month, and I think it would be pretty damn special if you came over for that. And you could saunter the boulevards with me and nibble on baguettes. We'll go to Storer Patisserie. I've already been there 4 times. I only got here 2 days ago. Okay, so let me say goodbye to you, my lovely listeners. I'll try and do another podcast for you before I leave Europe. Right outside the apartment here I love Arthur Rimbaud. Arthur Rimbaud, he was Jim Morrison's hero. He was like a rock star. He was from this town, Charleville. It's in the Champagne region of France. And I've actually been to Arthur Rimbaud's grave twice. And so there's this massive wall. It's right by this church, Saint. Oh, I know a little factoid I can lay on you real quick. When I read that Genghis Khan biography, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this popped into my head, and you should know this. When I read that Genghis Khan biography, before I went to Mongolia at the beginning of November, that's amazing. 1 month ago, I was in Mongolia, and now I'm in Paris. What a great life I'm having. Genghis Khan had a policy of religious tolerance. And if you were Muslim or Buddhist or Christian, you could be that under Genghis Khan's reign. He just wanted total submission and had no problem with people believing whatever they wanted to believe. And the biography made the point that at that same time in France, King Louis was persecuting the Jews and burning their holy books and burning Jews and killing so many Jews that the Catholic Church through Rome wanted to honor Louis for doing this, so they made him a saint. And that is who St. Louis is named after. So I wonder how the Sklar brothers will feel about that news. They're Jewish, and they're from St. Louis. Anyway, St. Sulpice Church, looking out the window at that church, just reminded me of that. Okay, if you look out the other windows, to the south, there is this massive wall, and it has this Arthur Rimbaud poem on it. And the poem is called The Drunken Boat. And it's kind of a long poem, and I'm going to read it to you now. In closing, this is The Drunken Boat by Arthur Rimbaud. As I was floating down unconcerned rivers, I no longer felt myself steered by the haulers. Gaudy redskins had taken them for targets, nailing them naked to colored stakes. I cared nothing for all my crews, carrying Flemish wheat or English cottons, when, along with my haulers, those uproars were done with. The rivers let me sail downstream where I pleased. Into the ferocious tide rips last winter, more absorbed than the minds of children, I ran, and the unmoored peninsulas never endured more triumphant clamorings. The storm made bliss of my sea-born awakenings. Lighter than a cork, I danced on the waves, which men call eternal rollers of victims, for 10 nights without once missing the foolish eye of the harbor lights. Sweeter than the flesh of sour apples to children, the green water penetrated my pine wood hull and washed my clean of the bluish, wine-stained, and splashes of vomit, carrying away both rudder and anchor. And from that time on, I bathed in the poem of the sea, star-infused and churned into milk, devouring the green azures, where, entranced in pallid flotsam, a dreaming drowned man sometimes goes down, where suddenly dying the bluenesses, deliriums, and slow rhythms under the gleams of the daylight, stronger than alcohol, vaster than music, ferment the bitter rednesses of love. I have come to know the skies splitting with lightnings, and the water spouts, and the breakers and currents. I know the evening, and dawn rising up like a flock of doves, and sometimes I have seen what men have imagined they saw. I have seen the low-hanging sun speckled with mystic horrors, lighting up long violet coagulations, like the performers in very antique dramas, waves rolling back into the distances their shiverings of Venetian blinds. I have dreamed of the green night of the dazzled snows, the kiss rising slowly to the eyes of the seas, the circulation of the undreamed of saps, and the yellow-blue awakenings of singing phosphorus. I have followed, for whole months on end, the swells, battering the reefs like hysterical herds of cows, never dreaming that the luminous fleet of the Marys could force back the muzzles of snorting oceans. I have struck, do you realize, incredible Floridas, where mingle with flowers the eyes of panthers in human skins, rainbows stretched like bridles under the sea's horizons to glaucous herds. I have seen the enormous swamp seething, traps where a whole leviathan rots in the reeds, downfalls of waters in the mists of the calm, and distances cataracting down into the abysses, glaciers, suns of silver, waves of pearl, skies of red-hot coals, hideous wrecks at the bottom of brown gulfs, where the giant snakes devoured by vermin fall from the twisted trees with black odors. I should have liked to show children those dolphins of the blue wave, those golden, those singing fishes. Foam of flowers rocked my driftings, and at times ineffable winds would lend me wings. Sometimes a martyr, weary of poles and zones, the sea whose sobs sweetened my rollings, lifted its shadow flowers with their yellow sucking discs towards me, and I hung there like a kneeling woman. Almost an island, tossing on my beaches the brawls and droppings of pale-eyed, clamoring birds, and I was scuttling along when across my frayed cordage drowned men sank backwards into sleep. But now I, a boat lost under the hair of coves, hurled by the hurricane into the birdless ether, I, whose wreck, dead drunk and sodden with water, neither monitor nor Hant's ships would have fished up, free, smoking, risen from violent frogs. I who bored through the wall of the reddening sky, which bears a sweet meat good poets find delicious, lichens of sunlight mixed with azure snot, who ran speckled with a lunula of electricity, a crazy plank with black sea horses for escort when Julys were crushing with cruel blows, skies of ultramarine into burning funnels. I who trembled to feel at 50 leagues distance the groans of behemoths rutting and of the dense maelstrom, eternal spinner of blue immobilities. I long for Europe with its aged old parapets. I have seen archipelagios of stars and islands whose delirious skies are open to sailor. Do you sleep? Are you exiled in those bottomless nights? Million golden birds, O life force of the future. But truly I have wept too much. The dawns are heartbreaking. Every moon is atrocious, and every sun bitter. Sharp love has swollen me up with heady languors. Oh, let my keel split. Oh, let me sink to the bottom. If there is one water in Europe I want, it is the black, cold pool where in the scented twilight a child squatting full of sadness launches a boat as fragile as a butterfly in May. I can no more, bathed in your languors, O waves, sail in the wake of the carriers of cottons, nor undergo the pride of the flags and pennants, nor pull past the horrible eyes of the hulks. Wow. Now, if you can imagine, that is written in French on this massive wall outside the south end view of my apartment. I love Arthur Rimbaud. That is a long-ass poem. Probably not my favorite Arthur Rimbaud poem, but nonetheless, it's in French on this fucking wall right outside of the apartment where I'm staying. Okay, well, I think that's about it. And thanks for listening. Start planning your trip to Paris to come see me next October. And I'm really happy. I'm going to go to the Charlie Chaplin house in Switzerland when I'm on that tour next week. So I'm going to try and do another episode for you next week from Switzerland. Oh, in case you didn't know, Arthur Rimbaud came to Paris when he was 17 years old, becomes this huge literary poet sensation of Paris. He was also gay and had a torrid love affair with Paul Verlaine, who was married. And they took a trip, a wild weekend to London, and they got into a lover's quarrel, and Paul Verlaine pulled out a gun and shot Arthur Rimbaud in the hand. Yeah. And then I don't think they saw each other after that. It was kind of a strange weekend. But Arthur Rimbaud, I've read a lot about him years ago. Kind of a dick, kind of a taunting little prick, and probably deserved to get shot in the hand. So he wrote a lot of great, love poems and young man dramatic verse. But the remarkable thing about Arthur Rimbaud, he never wrote another line of poetry after he turned 19 years old. He ended up leaving. He moved to North Africa, and he became a trader. And some people even think he started dealing in slaves. And then he got some terrible disease. I'm not sure what. I don't remember. It's been so many years. And he died at 38 years old. Came back to France, died in Marseille. I think he was 38 years old. And pretty remarkable that the guy is so revered in France that he would have this entire wall in the Saint-Germain neighborhood with this drunken boat poem on it. And the guy had only a 2-year window from 17 to 19 when he was actually writing poetry. And hey, Charlotte Corday killed Marat at 19. So a lot of people are peaking at that age. Keep that in mind. And hey, think about a clever line that you might lay on the people if you're going to be beheaded at the guillotine. So anyway, I think I'm going to end this episode with one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs, Tangled Up in Blue, because he mentions, kind of hints at Arthur Rimbaud in that song when he says he moved to Africa and he started dealing in slaves. Anyway, that's today's episode. Au revoir, mon amis, and long may you live in the glory. Hey, if you want to show your love and support me and the podcast, you can buy my brand new album, All Hail Laughter, on iTunes, Amazon, plus you can support my podcast by going to patreon.com/ Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. Please show your love. Hey, if you want to show your love and support me and the podcast, you can buy my brand new album, All Hail Laughter, on iTunes, Amazon, plus you can support my podcast by going to patreon.com/Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. Please show your love. I would appreciate it. Hi, this is Tom Rhodes. Please join me as I scour the four corners of the earth to bring you interesting and intelligent, funny people who will enrich your life with wisdom and laughter. I'll take you to Europe, Australia, all over America. I might take you to the peaks of Machu Picchu, the canals of Amsterdam, the Great Wall of China, or the swamps of Florida, and certainly the many, many comedy clubs and comedy theaters all over the world. Come hang out with me and meet the many interesting people that pop up in my life as I travel the world as a stand-up comedian.
You're listening to Tom Rhodes Radio.
Karate kick, baby.
Rock and roll.
Bonjour, y'all, and welcome to Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. I'm speaking to you now from Paris, France. Oui, oui. Mon frères, mon amis, mes amis. I will try to exhaust every word I learned in high school French during this episode. Mon crayon est jaune et grand. I think that means my pencil is big and yellow. I've got a long history with Paris, as some of you know. And I'm here by myself this visit because my beautiful, brilliant wife, Ashna, the frequent flyer miles to cash in a free ticket for her, she would have had to stay in Europe for 6 weeks, and we both thought that was a bunch of bullshit. So she took one for the team and sat this trip out. So I'm here by myself, got a great tour. Starting in Paris, then Sunday I'm in Antwerp, Tuesday, December 5th, I'm in Amsterdam, hope to see all my Dutchies, and then I'm going to be in Switzerland, Geneva, December 6th, Zurich, December 8th, and Basel, December 9th. What a tour. Hey, so I am in the Saint-Germain neighborhood of Paris. Very good friend, one of the local comedians in Paris, offered for me to stay in their luxurious apartment in the Saint-Germain neighborhood. And if you're familiar with Paris, the Saint-Germain neighborhood is probably the swankiest part of the city. And the irony of it all is the heat doesn't work too well. And I am freezing like a motherfucker. So I'm staying in this really nice, swanky apartment, and there's a fireplace, and I'm tempted to chop up this Victorian furniture so I can get a little heat. Looking out the window, straight out through the window, is the Saint Sulpice Church. And if you're familiar with, I was told this, that Dan Brown book, The Da Vinci Code, apparently this church right across the street plays a big part in that, where it was built on some meridian line and whatever. So apparently, since it's right across the street, I am on a meridian line. I went in there today. It's kind of old, kind of shitty. Not as nice as Notre Dame and some of the other churches. But this neighborhood is really, really swanky. Also, if you look out the other side, the other windows of this apartment, there's this wall, this massive wall that has the Arthur Rimbaud poem, The Drunken Boat. It's in French, of course, but I love Rimbaud, and it's quite a tingle to see the man's, this long poem right there on the wall. I've been reading a lot of stuff, getting ready for this. You know, I love history and violence and mayhem in literature. So I've been reading a lot about the French Revolution, and I was taking the subway. You know, if you're going to get your head cut off on the guillotine, you got to say something cool before you get your head cut off, right? So just a few blocks from here is the Odeon neighborhood or part of it's on Saint-Germain Boulevard. And I was taking the metro, the subway, and there's a statue of this guy, Danton, Danton. And they had a map of all this historic events that happened during the French Revolution.